Questions may kindly be posted in the chat box. It will be taken up later during the Q&A session. Warm greetings from Chennai Center for China Studies and National Maritime Foundation. Welcome to Institutional Dialogue on Information Warfare. When thinking of China and warfare, Sun Tzu and his seminal work, The Art of War, comes to our mind. But today, I would like to start with Chairman Mao, who counseled his generals to achieve victory. We must, as far as possible, make the enemy blind and deaf by sealing his eyes and ears and drive his commanders to distraction by creating confusion in their minds. These words mesh so contextually with the Chinese approach to information warfare that offers opportunities to win wars without the traditional clash of arms. Such aspects of Chinese information warfare doctrine includes psyops, denial and deception, that China believes provides the greatest prospects for victory in a conflict. Ancient Chinese war general Sun Tzu is so much interwoven into this. He wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." In modern context, as laid out in the Chinese Defense White Paper of 2008, China views an informatized warfare domain that includes the utilization of information-based weapons and forces, including battlefield management systems, precision strike capability, and technology-assisted command and control, including political and espionage effort. The question now remains among the strategic community is, how can India take advantage of this revolution in military affairs? To speak on this topical subject, we have Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain. Thank you very much, sir, for your valuable time with us today. This institutional dialogue will be steered by Lieutenant General S.L. Narasimhan. Thank you very much, sir, for graciously accepting our invitation to chair and moderate this discussion. With these words, I would like to hand over the floor to my director for his opening remarks. Over to you, Vasan, sir.
Bala, I thought you were supposed to introduce both the speakers. Please kindly introduce them and then hand over. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I just introduced the speaker and I just left it for the opening comments and later taken on by Lieutenant General.
Vasan sir, muted.
Yeah, I'm not speaking yet. I'm allowing Bala to access his document and introduce the speaker. Maybe a little bit of sequencing has gone haywire, but that's not an issue. So Bala, you have it. I would like to do it later.
I'm sorry, sir. Just introduce.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I take this opportunity to introduce Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain, former General Officer commanding 15th Corps, Srinagar, 21 Corps, and Military Secretary. I would also take this opportunity to introduce the chair and moderator of this session, Lieutenant General S.L. Narasimhan, Director General, Center for Contemporary China Studies, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. On this note, I would like to hand over the floor to my director, Commodore Vasan, sir. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Bala. That was a brief introduction, but that's mainly because everybody knows who is General Hasnain, and General Narasimhan is not new to us at all. In fact, it was at very short notice that he accepted my request to come and moderate because General Shankar, who is also his course mate, was not able to come because of a small medical condition, which of course he has put behind him. So, all of you would have been reading General Hasnain regularly in various newspapers. He is also on TV channels. And likewise, General Narasimhan, he's also been a regular participant over here. And many of the views are really thought-provoking. Today, we chose this issue related to information warfare. Bala has set the initial context of how Mao looked at it or whether how Sun Tzu is still relevant today. But let's move forward a little more and look at what happened at Doklam. Because what happened in 2017 tells you that China was actually using this in a big way, trying to browbeat both Bhutan and India. And that is when we first saw the glimpses of informatized warfare. This has been written about extensively, so I'm not the speaker today, so I'll definitely allow General Narasimhan and General Hasnain to talk about it. But we need to be conscious of the fact that the entire dimensions of warfare have changed. Frequently nowadays people go back to this book that was written by these two Air Force colonels of China, which is Unrestricted Warfare. Of course, it's been badly translated, and General Narasimhan tell you that it's very badly translated, and it's been seen as how to destroy America, which is not the case. So, but however, what is relevant there is the kind of warfare that they have discussed, which relates to lawfare, economic warfare, and of course, network warfare, and finally, all the summation of all this, which is also the informatized warfare. So there are multiple layers of this, and we all know it's knowledge that's power, and you gain knowledge by information. And once you have all the information with you, either it is manipulated information, or it is something which is gathered together to get the complete details about the enemy. So there are again multiple layers of information warfare. So this is what we are going to look at, and I'm sure the audience are keenly looking forward to this talk on information warfare, because we have seen this happening every day. You saw, to bring it to the local context, you saw that famous toolkit which was brought about to say that this is what is being used to drive a narrative in India. Likewise, there are many of these which are either paid news, there is information, there is disinformation, there is disabused information. So there are so many things which are there, and we need to be very cautious of how we are dealing with information, because this is being used to destabilize the opponents. There's one incident which I'm sure General Nassim will talk about, which was the playing of the Punjabi songs, along the border with loudspeakers. So I don't know what they were trying to do. They wanted perhaps the Punjabis and others to start doing a Bhangra. So this is also part of information warfare, but we will definitely like to take up and find out why was this done, And so with that, without much ado, may I now request General Narasimhan to take over, conduct the proceedings, and we definitely look forward to a very intense discussion on this. Thank you. Over to you, General Narasimhan.
Thank you very much, Commodore Vasan sir, and it's a pleasure to be on the panel with General Hasnain, who has been a mentor when I was in service some time ago, and it's also always a pleasure to listen to him on the subjects that he talks about. Today's subject of information warfare is becoming more and more prominent in the warfare that is today and in the future. The reason for that is, if you look at the components of information warfare, there are three of them. One is the cyber, the other one is the psychological warfare, and the third one is the electronic warfare. These three put together actually shapes the decision making and helps in conduct of operations in now as well as in future. And the reason for that is very simple. Today, more and more of networking, more and more of satellite kind of information, more and more of battlefield transparency is actually driving this particular aspect of warfare. The point which Commodore Vasan talked about, the Punjabi songs, there is nothing new. Right from 62 time onwards and 67 in Atullah, these things were done. Basically, it tries to psychologically affect the fighting capability or to divert the attention of the adversary in a planned manner. You find leaflets also being given. In 62, 67, leaflets were being passed around. Not now. Now, of course, it's a different ball game. So there are many ways of doing this information warfare. And China, I'm taking the example of China, but there are other countries. Like, for example, US has got a cyber command, which actually deals with this kind of an issue and other issues related to this. Similarly, China, when it went for the reforms, he brought in a new service called PLA Strategic Support Force, which has got two components. One component deals with space, the other component deals with network warfare. So basic thing is, the countries are actually moving towards informationized warfare, which already being transformed into intelligentized warfare. So from informationized warfare, you are actually moving towards intelligentized warfare. What happens is, artificial intelligence rides on informational warfare to make it intelligentized warfare. So basic thing is, it's an evolving field still, and we are going to see more and more of it. And that is all the more reason why we should be actually looking at it in great amount of detail. So with these words, I will hand over the floor to General Hasnain for his remarks, and thereafter, then I'll take on the questions and the discussion that comes thereafter. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, General Nara. Always a pleasure being with you. I still remember the time that we have been in the last few years, always been meeting at the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy breakfast table. Always there. We are always somehow following each other to that institution. But Jai Hind to everyone. What a wonderful occasion this is. Meeting old friends. I just met Mr. Arun Vishwanathan. I think we are talking to each other after 1962. So it's quite a thing to be with lots of people who one has known. I know time is short, and I will first thing I will do is to share my screen with you all and hope like hell that it works, and then immediately get into just a second. A window, yeah. Oh, I can. Am I being heard correctly? And is my presentation seen?
Yeah, you're clear. You're clear.
Is the presentation moving also? Can you see the second slide?
No, you are not gone into the slide mode. You're still on the slide sort of.
Oh, that is the problem. Okay, so I'll come back now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this on the edit mode and not. Can you see the second slide?
Yes.
I'll keep it on this mode only. This is the problem with Google Meet, sometimes which happens, but it doesn't matter. I'm sure you can see the slide well enough as it is in this current mode. Okay, so let me get into this straight away. Thank you first of all by inviting me. It's an honor, absolutely. And as I was just mentioning a few minutes ago, you put me under intense pressure because your institution center has actually acquired such a name for itself. Normally, someone calling me for information warfare, I would step out from my bed and probably take a lecture like that. But knowing that it is your center, one had to get back into studies, research a little bit, make sure one was completely updated. So that's the kind of reputation that you enjoy. Thankfully, the introductions have been excellent. Everyone has spoken about the right things. What I'll do is I'll speak of one or two other things concerning this. Firstly, we in India live in a region surrounded by two nations which are very high up on the information game. We've spoken a lot about China. Now I was bringing back to Pakistan also. Just remember, there's an organization called the Inter-Services Public Relations, the ISPR, which was raised in 1949. This is something which most people are unaware of, which means that someone in the Pakistan Armed Forces obviously thought that public relations, information, at some stage is going to make a major difference to the entire security environment. So as long back as 1949, they had created this. This predates the ISI by many years. And then the kind of experience they got in Afghanistan during the 80s, the handling of the Punjab issue, the sponsoring of the Punjab terrorism through the 80s again, and of course then after that, when Jammu and Kashmir broke out in 1989, from then onwards. And China, on the other hand, which of course revolutionized the whole concept after the 1990 Gulf War I, which I will speak subsequently also. What we really need to be aware of is the fact that there was a time when war was presumed to be an extension only to the military fraternity, only to the soldiers in the field, only to the borders and things like that. Over a period of time, now war has also taken within its ambit civil society. Every element of the country, it has entered right deep into your drawing rooms. You saw this in the Gulf War, first Gulf War. You saw this during Kargil, and it continues to keep happening. So impact is no longer just physical. Now it is psychological. It is infocentric, which means societies have become infocentric. And as you just mentioned about unrestricted warfare, warfare has really got no restrictions on it. There are no bracketing of warfare any longer. Chinese, I think everything good has been said about the Chinese concept of IW already, but they believe in what's called the system of systems entity, robust information confrontation system. and the recent experience in the last few days, you can see, of attempting to play down India's comprehensive national power, even as they are extending trade with us, even as they are selling at, of course, very, very high prices, things like oxygen concentrators, etc. But if you go into the media, if you see their thing, continuously they're talking and commenting about the second wave in India and how poorly India seems to be handling it. And that is the kind of information that they are putting out to their own people. So let me come straight into the generic information. I'll have to keep removing these because otherwise they are, yeah. There is no fixed definition or scope which includes prevention or disruption of the use of the electronic spectrum. There are a lot of slides I've got here. There's a lot of text I've got here. I'm using this primarily because I don't want to make it a generic kind of a talk. I wanted to make it specific and I don't want to extend my time. So I will be making use of these slides and most of the text on this. Manipulation and deception using all the means of information are also essential parts of this. Psychological warfare and propaganda. Perception management, an essential part. This applies nationally to all spheres of functioning, almost to every sphere of national functioning, government functioning. And it applies in special and unique way to the armed forces, which look at command and control, network centricity for intelligence, and the use for weapons systems. Let me just bring this in here. The application of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to the ISR, which we are used to every sphere of functioning, makes information warfare even more lethal. Now, as a domain of warfare, let's just take it away from the whole idea, the whole concept of taking the entire civil society into its fold. Let's look at the aspect of information as a domain of warfare. And very appropriately, General Narasimhan just introduced the term intelligentized warfare, not just informationized warfare, because we in the military, as you know, always consider that intelligence is a processed information. Information may just be generic. Intelligence is always processed. And that is the information, that element of the information which can be actually made use of for military purposes is then kept with us in that concentrated form. So that is a very, very appropriate terminology, there's no doubt. But the definition from a military point of view, information is any action to deny, exploit, corrupt, or destroy the enemy's information and its functions. Protecting ourselves, that means destroying the enemy, protecting ourselves against those actions, and exploiting our own military information functions. I'm going into some of these basics, because I know that across the board, my audience, not everyone is from the military, so it's a good thing to bring everyone on board at the same time. The purpose of IW, the chief objective of information warfare, is to achieve information superiority over an adversary. My information is of a higher quality. I have information which I can make use of more appropriately. More information, better information. That's the whole purpose of getting it better than the enemy. Information warfare means making sure our information is reliable and accurate. And at the same time, information warfare means denying information superiority to your adversary. A lot of these extras mentioned here. Information enables the best decisions to overcome the uncertainty of war. Now, someone who's not used to the whole aspect of military decision making must realize that as much as decision making is always a problem in any domain of life, in military decision making it becomes even more important because lives are involved here, and the speed at which some of the decisions have to be made is intense, and that's why you must have the most reliable, you must have the maximum information and the most reliable information always available to you. Denying this to the enemy or falsifying it prevents optimum decision making and also contributes to deception. The purpose, it is a subset of the war spectrum. Now, what is the war spectrum? My friends, not from the uniform, just for your very basic knowledge, warfare is a spectrum. It consists of a series of different activities If you take it from one side to the other, there is high-end warfare and the other end is low-end warfare. And in the middle, there are all kinds of domains of warfare. You can even have economic warfare. You can have information warfare is just one of the subsets of that. You can have economic warfare, financial warfare, psychological warfare, I mean, all kinds of different warfares. And this is one of the subsets of it. The purpose is to make decision-making more difficult for the enemy and much easier for ourselves. So you're using information as a weapon system to manipulate the enemy to thinking towards a desired direction, which you manipulate. I'll give you a lot of examples of this subsequently, to deceive them about the way we think. So while you are attempting to manipulate the mind of your adversary and forcing him to think in one direction, at the same time you're deceiving him about the way we are thinking, our methods of planning, to dilute, manage the self-confidence and perception of the enemy's public while increasing that of our own. Now, this is something which is very important. The means to do this were not easily available in the years before, but today with the coming of social media, all other means of public information, today it is far easier to reach out directly to the public and try and attempt the change of perception of the thinking of the enemy's public, the public and the other side. Let's go beyond. Just a few things to finish off here. Targets, own homeland and forces. A lot of people may think that information warfare is only, that we would like to use information warfare only against the enemy. Many times you will have to use information warfare against your own forces, which means you have to reinforce certain thoughts. You have to reinforce certain ideas in their mind. An example of this I will give you at the end when we talk about Jammu and Kashmir, but let me try and introduce that idea here itself. For example, many of our soldiers in Jammu and Kashmir who served in the early 90s tend to treat the people of Jammu and Kashmir quite differently. The manner in which the perception prevailed at the beginning of the conflict. Today we are at conflict stabilization, we are looking at conflict transformation, so you cannot have the same attitude. To change the attitude of our soldiers, our own forces against the public, for example. You use certain methodologies, certain information which you impinge on their mind, you do certain training, and that is a part of information warfare. You also target strategic communities, the industry, business, and scientific community in different countries to make sure that those who support the war effort are equally affected by it. For example, while Germany was in the midst of Second World War, one of the driving forces behind it was the scientific community, the academic community, the research community, and the community which was into the process of manufacturing. Now, what the Allies therefore needed to do and what they did was also to try and impinge their thoughts on this element within the German society, to force them to rethink, force them to think as to what they were doing and for what purpose they were doing it. Similarly, academia, political leadership. In today's world, when we are looking at a lot of ideological wars here and there, the clergy makes a tremendous difference. The clergy, how the clergy is thinking and how you need to moderate the thinking of the clergy on the other side, this also becomes a part of information warfare. Media, of course, is one of the most essential elements. The print media, the electronic media, all forms of media. The print media in particular can make a tremendous impact. The impact it carries. Electronic media has a short-term kind of effect on the mind, but the print media, something which a person persists with in reading, rereading, is something which probably carries greater value sometimes. The types of information warfare, all of them listed out for you here: political and propaganda warfare, psychological operations, information operations, perception management, manipulation and deception. We have talked about all this, and the means are very well known to you. Some of the principles and characteristics. Now, this is sounding a little textbook or more journal staff pamphlet like, but I promise to make it a little different subsequently. Just remember that some of the principles and characteristics of playing out the information warfare game. the selection and identification of the target audience. It's not as if it's just a generic audience. There may be information warfare played out generically on an entire nation. That is something different. But if you want a specific, for a specific purpose, then there has to be a target audience which has to be looked at. For example, there could be a minority community within a country which you want to target. Or there can be a certain tribe in a particular area which you want to target. So these are for example, in Jammu and Kashmir, many times you want to target elements of the Gujars or the Gujar Bakarwal community. You want to make sure that they remain very nationalistic and things like that. So you target them. Topical subjects, well, there's no end to it. Subjects keep coming up from time to time and keep selecting themes based on what advisories you get from people who are studying this academically. And that is why one of the very major things in the whole game of information warfare is that you have to have a backup organization which is supporting you, which is researching, carrying out academic activity, providing you with enough material, and then giving you the thoughts and ideas which need to be touched upon. For example, I'm giving you a lot of examples from Jammu and Kashmir, where most of my experience goes back to. Jammu and Kashmir is one place where the psychological warfare game is very intense. Pakistan is playing it all the time to try and keep the population fixed with itself. But equally, we have to play it from time to time. So you look at certain subjects on the aspects of separatism, for example, or youth, the whole aspect of youth power, skills, the aspect of how much India has to offer, for example, on the skill platform to the youth in Kashmir, and what can the other side, Pakistan, offer you. So you create tremendous number of themes and look at methodologies of how to spread this on. Then you look for the best means of communication. Today's world, you don't have to look too far beyond. Social media almost suggests itself as one of the best means of communication. But anything that you make has to be creative, attractive, appropriately put together, not too long. No one is going to read thesis for this. It has to be very crisp, very attractive, and appropriately messaged. The research and authenticity, which I just spoke about, and then of course there's a credibility aspect to it. It's not just any information out of the blue that you put across, because there are people on the other side who are researching, who are looking into it, who are countering at the same time. So if you want the effect of the communication which you're making, then the credibility factor has to be very high. Then the maintenance of continuity. Now, I can assure you that I thought it was a very, very simple thing to play out the information game in Jammu and Kashmir. And I remember when social media got introduced into Srinagar, when Facebook and Twitter came into being in 2010 in a big way, and there was internet penetration, and that time 2G, 3G was playing out into the rural areas. That is the time when I thought it's very simple. We can set up a cell which can continuously on an everyday basis put out certain messages under different pseudonyms and things like that. I can assure you the third day we ran out of material because we had no research facility, we had no one to continuously feed us information, and the knowledge about Kashmiri culture, the knowledge about the religion of Islam, the knowledge about local conditions was limited to our experience of what we had seen there, nothing more than that. But we realized that we needed far deeper research to be able to maintain continuity. And that is something which is happening today, although not to the desired effect as I would want it. And then, of course, monitoring for effect is important to monitor where is the effect of what you are attempting to do. Tweaking, altering the communication from time to time, and that is a very important aspect. Okay. I thought, let me explain this to you slightly differently from this angle. I am also a member of the PMO Empowered Group number 8 on communication. Now, information warfare, incidentally, as we are all aware, in the domain of the civil world, civil society, is really not called information warfare. It is called communication strategy, or strategic communication, if you like to put it that way. Therefore, when the PMO set up the various empowered groups to look at the handling of COVID last year, the month of April, this empowered group number 8 got set up under the Information and Broadcasting Ministry, with the Secretary Information and Broadcasting as the convener, and I was requested to join this group for advice, being a secretary level officer myself. So how does it deal? Now here is, you've got an organization, the Information and Broadcasting Ministry, which has got access to information of all kinds. It's got access to the health ministry, it's got access to all the ministries concerned, it's got access to the database, it's got access to hospitals, anyone concerned. So as far as information is concerned, there is just no problem. It's a question of deciding what you want to put across. Now this is a typical thing of today's world. I'm looking at a civilized system completely, and the lessons of this apply equally to the world of the military and to the world of warfare. So the empowered group, as I said, deals with communication strategy on COVID. The challenge has been in inculcating COVID appropriate behavior in the Indian people. Now, I can assure you the kind of resistance which I have seen among the Indian people to following a COVID appropriate behavior. You can see it in the streets anywhere. No one wants to follow it. But then we came out with some catchy, slogans. The Prime Minister gave out certain catchy slogans. Everyone was looking at primarily masking and social distancing and hand washing and basically aspects of hygiene and things like that. And these were very simple little things which were put out. We found that it made a difference here and there. We put out caller tunes on the mobile and things like that. But we had Doordarshan doing this for us. We had NIC doing it for us. We had MyGov doing it for us. But I don't know, somehow the government was the INB ministry was very reluctant about putting this out through the private channels and putting out much of this information through the social media. In fact, the social media aspect was the least. And I found, therefore, that the actual traction that this information got was, of course, a fair amount, but much restricted compared to what it could have been if we had chosen the correct channels such as social media. It's got a plethora of means to create visuals and communicate them. You say it within half an hour, the INB ministry can create a visual. Now, this is something which organizations which are running information warfare in the military domain always need to remember. You need to have this backup with you at all times. You ask for a thing and say, okay, give me a research on this particular aspect about Pakistan. Shia-Sunni relations in Pakistan. Give me a little bit of information. Hanization in Tibet. Give me a little information. This is the kind of information which you need on your fingertips. Someone should be able to give you this to you in 5 to 10 minutes. And to see how this can be spun into appropriate messaging. It's not that you're going to take out text from what you got Wikipedia or things like that, and you're going to start pasting them here. That is not going to get you anything. What has to be there is what will communicate to the human mind. What is going to be catchy? What will be attractive? What will appeal to him? That is the aspect which is needed. Today we are battling as a part of this empowered group. We are now battling with the whole problem of vaccination. Let's bring this back here. The whole problem of vaccination, overcoming vaccine hesitation in rural areas in particular. That's the next change, right? How to convince people. Otherwise, the common understanding and belief is that the vaccine is going to make people impotent and things like that. So this is something which has to be overcome. This is a typical example of a psychological warfare campaign taken from the military domain and actually being exercised here to influence people. Let me give you 2 interesting examples of the past. Everyone is aware of these. They are examples from history. particularly on the aspect of deception and manipulation. The landings at Normandy, 6 June 1945, and the Yom Kippur War in 73. You remember the landing is at Normandy. The Germans were prepared for the landings. They knew that the Allies are coming. The question was, could they put a soldier at every single meter of the coastline, the French coastline or the Dutch coastline, etc. That was not possible. But they had kept their forces back. They had got the surveillance elements ahead. But there was a system of manipulation, a system of manipulated information and plant, which ensured that the Germans kept thinking that the French landing, that the Allied landings would take place in a different area. Le Havre, that's what it would take place. And ultimately they took place in Normandy. The Yom Kippur War of 1973, classic case of deception using information. I think the classic one in this was particularly, one example was the carrying of different advertisements in Al-Ahram, a very respected newspaper in Egypt, in which it gave out requirements. It said on the day of 6th of October, so many groups of people will go for Hajj to Saudi Arabia, and it asked for volunteers from the armed forces, the Egyptian army and the Air Force in particular, on a concessional rate, taking them along. Now, anyone reading this in Israel would think, is a country which is about to go to war, would it be organizing Hajj expeditions for its soldiers and its airmen at that particular time? This is something which appeared to have convinced the Israelis that all the indicators that they were seeing on the battlefield, on the battlefront, ahead of the Suez Canal, the incoming troops, outgoing troops, etc., bits of plumes of smoke here and plumes of dust here and there, were not actions which were which were pointing to war. And ultimately, you saw what happened on the 6th of October, 2:30 p.m., how the Egyptian army managed to deceive the Israelis to be able to get across the Suez Canal. And of course, the rest of the war is something different which happened. Okay, so the whole concept of information warfare through the 80s and 90s underwent a change. I think some of the important landmarks which we need to remember is the Afghan war. And particularly, this is the time when you found the transition from conventional war to hybrid war. And hybrid war, as you are aware, is a combination of different elements of warfare put together by choice, by requirement for that particular situation, and it doesn't amount to a frontal kind of a conventional war conditions. Information warfare just selects itself, ideally, to be a component of hybrid warfare. So during the 80s, the Afghan war, the Soviet Union having invaded Afghanistan, information became a very important aspect of keeping the message of jihad alive at that time. If you remember, the Americans were providing the weapons, Saudi Arabia was providing the funding, the Pakistanis were providing essentially frontline leadership in terms of intelligence, public relations, and even ideology to a great extent. Keeping the jihadis united, demoralizing the Soviets. 8 to 9 years this went on. This is where the Pakistanis actually gained their maximum experience of handling information as a weapon system. And this is one of the reasons why they are so high up on the use of information warfare. By 1990, you found the Gulf War 1 took place. And this was all about, the Republican Guard of the Iraqi army, which had been identified virtually as the center of gravity. Saddam Hussein had virtually created a phantom out of it. What the Allies wanted at this time was to upset the command and control system here, the satellite communication system. So there's a lot of technology used with it, the C4I aspects, simultaneity of information, destroy it, public information, bring it to the fore to the public on the aspect of unavailability. The coming of CNN, cable television, 24/7 news, television debate, all this 1990, this is a time when war actually entered your drawing rooms. And the people who really learned their lessons from it, the first were not the Americans themselves, were not the Western world, it was China. China adopted the lessons of the Gulf War, first Gulf War, local warfare under high-tech conditions. By 1993, they had doctrinized this completely. And by 2003, China, war under informationized conditions, which Narasimhan was just talking about, the sixth guideline, 3 strategies emerged from this: media war, cyber war, legal war. And therefore, this particular slide covers up everything on the Chinese information warfare system. Let me just read this for you. China no longer views war as a battle of traditional military weapons and forces, but as a conflict of operational systems. Very, very profound kind of use of words here. Within their system of systems thinking, China has designed a robust information confrontation system. The information battlefield of the People's Liberation Army includes 3 domains: electronic, cyber, and psychological. The military has aligned its efforts, adding new equipment and platforms to pursue systems confrontation. And the Chinese see victory as a destruction of systems, not as an aspect of physical occupation of territory. That's the way I do it. Those last 2 words are my own. That's the way China looks at this whole information warfare system. Not many countries in the world have actually graduated to research information warfare to such an extent and transform their own thinking, their own doctrines of war fighting, the way China has done so. Continuing with the lessons from the 80s and the 90s, information warfare was transformed to IT warfare, information technology warfare, because more than to enable information, it was basically information technology which came into the fore. And IT-based network centricity became highly important to play out any aspect of information warfare that you wanted to play. Transformation in warfare took place. Conventional full spectrum war became past, as I just mentioned, and alternative means were found in the information age. Disruption capability by remote, non-lethal means got enhanced. You know, we're saying the kind of weapon systems and the kind of accuracies that we looked at, primarily because of the network centricity which was created, and the ability now to paralyze the adversaries' networks to ensure that the adversaries' weapon systems could not be rendered as effective. China's retention of the full spectrum, but real means of war remained only the 3 strategies that we just spoke about. This is the important aspect. China did not do away with conventional warfare. At the backdrop, conventional armies, well equipped, although downsized, well equipped, continue to remain there in forms of deterrence. They will always step in the case of contingencies. But essentially, the means to fight war today remain the 3 strategies that we just spoke about. That is media, cyber, and legal. Data became the means of vulnerability. Targeting the enemy's data, preventing him from using his own data, preventing him being able to access his own data. And this is something which I will sum up at the end as one of the major weaknesses that we have in our system at the moment. In the 90s and stepping into the millennium, we won't go to the left first, just quickly just have a look at the command and control warfare aspects. Defeating the enemy by destroying his command and control warfare systems, just to make sure that the enemy's command structure was separated from his forces. The command could not communicate. The command could not convey the message and the information. And protecting your own command and control forces, connecting your own commanders and forces, so that your decision making was taking place in the right time frame, while the enemy's decision making was upset. The whole cycles were upset. Now coming to the left, information continued to be fused with technology. The focus on jointness in military structures in China became very profound. And network centricity led to shared awareness, far quicker, swifter shared awareness between different layers and different levels of command. Effective command and control, much better speed, improved precision guided munitions and stealth platforms came into being, although they became more and more vulnerable. The whole idea was how to keep protecting these improved precision guided munitions and stealth platforms, which were, coming into being in such large quantities. And the transformed focus on people centricity. This last one is a very important aspect, because given everything about technology, given everything about information, the people centricity remained important, because if you remember, I mentioned hybrid war, unrestricted war, and then moving on into later years, recent years, gray zone warfare, invisible warfare, etc. The people centricity continued to remain very, very important. But many of these wars were fought around demands and desires of people for that reason. The information war and CICT operations. Now, CICT, that is counterinsurgency and counter-terrorist operations, essentially forms a part of the entire domain of hybrid war. So, within hybrid war, post-Cold War, as I mentioned, hybrid wars have become the rage. In hybrid, financial, overground workers, training, planning and coordination, all this has improved tremendously because of the availability of information systems. Motivation has gone up. The ability of the Islamic State, you remember its high-profile magazine, color magazine called The Beak, and the manner in which the Islamic State played out its information to warfare to attract people from the Western world. If 40,000 fighters who had nothing to do with them could be attracted from multiple countries around the West and other parts of the world and flock to them to fight, they must have done something very right, very correct in the domain of information warfare. Obviously, they had done their research work very deeply. Scholars who subsequently researched this entire thing could never come up with answers as to what was so attractive with the Islamic State's system. But then they realized that perhaps some of the issues on which the Islamic State actually focused were things like nihilism, the aspect of appealing to the inner senses of a human being in a society which has plenty. A society with plenty is essentially looking for excitement, is looking for something different, and that aspect is what the Islamic State appealed to, making use of its systems. The Islamic State was nothing but the elements of the Republican Guard of the state of Iraq, and it's surprising that this is the depth of research that they could carry out on a subject such as this and put together the information technology to create an information warfare system of the kind that they created. In low intensity, unconventional and non-contact operations, the center of gravity still remains the people of the region. Whether it is Ukraine or whether it is the Arab Spring. Now, if you remember the Arab Spring, could the Arab Spring have been brought about in this manner that it was brought about 2009, 10, 11 in Tunisia, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria? Could it have been brought about without the use of information technology, without the use of social media? I have my doubts. You see, the desire of the people which had been boiling for many, many years in the Arab world could never be brought together to that level of passion which social media and information systems could put together. And all that they did was they took primarily the teachings of a very famous, popular ideologue from the Western world, from America, a man called Gene Sharp, and put together his ideas of what is called from dictatorship to democracy. That was the book which was written in 1993. They conveyed those ideas essentially into their societies. Why I'm saying this particularly is that in 2008, the same book was being translated in Kashmir for Ali Shah Gilani, the separatist leader. It was being translated into Urdu. and they were fully aware of what was going to happen in the Arab world as far as the Arab Spring was concerned. But there was no penetration of the internet at that time in Kashmir. Although Kashmir, there was already on the boil. There was a tremendous people's movement. Streets were up in arms against everyone, but somehow they could not get these ideas going in the manner that the leaders in the Arab world could get those ideas going, the ideas of Gene Sharp going there. Information warfare is also used extensively to secure the support of the people. As I was telling you, that if you ultimately the center of gravity are the people. If whoever the people support, they support the terrorist, or they support the country which is sponsoring the terrorist, or they support the host country, the home country, that side will always get the advantage. And this is a major tussle which goes on in any CICT campaign which goes on, and most of you are aware of this. Let me see how an example from my experience of how this was played out. Information warfare strategies being tweaked for effect. Let me just play this out for you. The concept, when I went back there in 2010 as the Corps Commander, and this is all from experience, the concept, the Indian Army was perfect. The Indian Army has used its methodologies, strategies of this kind in a perfect way. The concept, it somehow needed a little tweaking at this time, was essentially the balancing of hard and soft power. When we went in 89-90, we went in with all guns blazing. It was necessary. Without that, we could never have held Kashmir together. Conflict initiation stage demanded that there be 80% hard power, but just about 20% soft power, because we needed to make sure that the people remained with us. But somewhere along the line, we forgot how to tweak the balancing of the hard and soft power. This is something I realized, that most of our commanders had done the right things, but the message had not been conveyed adequately in a doctrinized form to our troops and our officers to think about. That is what I attempted to bring about. The Pakistani strength here was ideology, religion, faith, a very strong information warfare system, and a very strong information warfare agency in the form of the ISPR. In India, in the Indian Army, we had no such organization. The so-called PI directorate was just not up to it. It was not even an authorized organization. There was a strong separatist streak among the people, and we were winning the war. We were winning these street battles. We were winning the war on the line of control against the terrorists. We were killing a lot of terrorists, but at the same time, we were not winning the war among the people. We were not getting the people on our side. Our own concept focused on attitude of troops, the force ethos. We needed to change the ethos of the force to convince our own people back to them. And that, with that, we would take the wind out of the sails of the Pakistani campaign. We had to make sure there was no otherization of the population. Enhance own tolerance. Terrorist is the enemy. Awam is your friend. Awam is the people. Terrorist is the enemy. Awam is the friend. This is what had to be conveyed in some form or the other. Respect to local tradition. Enhance assistance in medical, women empowerment, education. These were the things that we needed the government to do, which the government was not sufficiently doing. The local government was not doing it. Everyone felt that the army needed to do whatever it had to do. The government was not, it was not possible for the government to do it. Now, these are the things which had to be changed. We had to create the psychological conditions for the acceptance of India's message, the nation's message to the people, telling them, you are a part of India, you are Indian. And this information messaging had to be done intelligently. You'll be surprised that Kashmir is one of those few states, Srinagar is one of the few capitals which publishes 30 English newspapers in a day. We had just never looked at the English media. We had never looked at the Urdu media. It was all anti-national in nature. We had never looked at bringing in the footprint of the national media into Kashmir. If we tried it, we failed. But we could tweak and we could take on board the local media to a great extent. We could manipulate the local media if required at all. But this had not been done sufficiently. Subsequently, we played out people-friendly operations to a great extent. The Indian Army has been very famous for it, doing it from 1990 onwards in an operation called Operation Sadbhavna, as you are all aware of. It was played out from 1997 onwards. I'd call this a classic example of information warfare. And as we went along, as we've gone along, and as social media has entered in here, internet penetration has increased in the valley. Our outreach to the people through this, particularly the youth. I just went there 2 months ago, and I can tell you the kind of activity among the youth in Kashmir which is happening today at the instance of the Indian Army is just nobody's business. Okay.
Sir, we need some time for question answers.
Yeah, I'm just finishing this.
Yes.
Finishing this. Yeah. I'm going to hurry this a bit. I will not go into this. I will just cover a few other aspects. What are the Indian vulnerabilities to information warfare? You just see this here. We have a low strategic culture. So the understanding of this whole idea is, the domain, information warfare has got civilianized. It has got into the civilian domain to a great extent, but the strategic culture of the country doesn't support the actions which are necessary to be carried out. The democratic nature of India, opinion matters. Demographics and cleavages in society, we are a multi-faith, we are a multi-caste, we are a multi-linguistic society, and obviously we will be therefore vulnerable to it. Gullibility due to low education levels. Fake news peddling therefore becomes that much more easier. Insufficient internet penetration so far. We haven't even seen the beginnings of this problem is going to proliferate to a very great extent. The whole aspect of fake news particularly. Unrestricted electronic media, low protocols of information management, as I just was explaining to you, the example of the EG8, that we are not sufficiently using the systems that are available to us, and the lack of synchronization between information managers and the security agencies. We still have not come to that level where we feel that information is actually a weapon system. Very quickly, I'm just going to finish this. You can see no unified command as far as our entire cyber systems are concerned. Defense, we have different ministries, Telecom Ministry, Home Ministry, Ministry of Defense, the PMO, different organizations, DRDO, dealing with their own domains. But we have made a beginning, of course. The Navy has made a great beginning, of course, at the headquarter IDS with the recently set up cyber agency, but we need to go far, far beyond this in the near future. I'm coming to the last three slides. How social media has made a difference to information warfare. The direct outreach to individual and hence to the society. Multiple targets can be taken simultaneously. Earlier you were looking at particular portions of society here and there. Now you can take on multiple targets simultaneously. Faked and manipulated information is far easier to spread. Genuine information for change can also be brought about, creating schisms in society. It requires very deep research, backup, continuity, and authenticity to continue these campaigns with any level of credibility. Youth vulnerability is something which increases hugely, although social media also provides the means for national messaging if you have the right systems in place. And this is the last thing which I want to speak about. Yeah. This is the thing which I really want to speak about at the end. Yeah. The consideration for India's information warfare policy and structures. I'm not suggesting a structure to you. What I'm just telling you is that at the highest level, of course, there is nothing taking away the importance of the Cabinet Committee for Security. The CCS remains the organization which directs, gives out all the guidelines. But below it, we need a National Communication Strategy Board or an authority comprising experienced personalities from defense, intelligence, academic, police, political, psychological, social, cyber, economic, and business fields. Which is almost a comprehensive set of fields. If you really look at comprehensive national park, comes out of all these fields. We need advice from all of them. This presupposes a thorough background of strategic culture for all those who are going to be ever involved in this game of information warfare. Take inputs from information warfare agencies of institutions and organizations, the armed forces, intelligence agencies. The corporate world itself has got its own IW systems. Cyber world, technical intelligence, the whole aspect of technical intelligence and organizations, creation of a multi-agency cyber command and an information warfare command. This is primarily cyber command for the nation, IW command more for the armed forces. The concept of information warriors, data sovereignty, and data security. This is something that we'll have to look into. And finally, a policy paper on national information security. Without this, we are not going to go anywhere, because at the moment, taking fledgling steps towards this is not going to give us enough dividend. Without backing of a robust academic research community, this effort is not going to go anywhere. And lastly, strategic deterrence needs a credible offensive, proactive defense, and information peacekeeping. That's the terminology now being introduced. Information peacekeeping capability in which to project power and influence globally. The importance of getting the MEA in conjunction with the INB ministry to putting together the various means through such a national communication strategy board and influencing internationally is just the most essential thing which is required for the moment. I have come to the end. I'm sorry it took a little extra time, but I thought I could convey the maximum that I could in this time. Thank you very much, and I'll stop sharing my slides at this stage.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a very enlightening talk. I am not going to sum up what General Hasnain had said. It was very clear and distinct message that he gave across. What I will do is I'll open up the question answers first, because we are running short of a bit of a time. And in the end, as part of my summing up, I'll cover a couple of points. I think the first question came from, let me take it from the chat box. The first question came from Mr. Avinash Kumar, who talked about the idea of cyber diplomats. It is in the initial phase in many countries. What are the problems that are arising with multiple nations to adopt this policy, which help in avoiding conflicts through negotiations? Sir.
Cyber diplomat, first of all, I'm not sure what exactly is meant by cyber diplomat. So I'm hearing the term, frankly saying, for the first time as cyber diplomat. So if the person questioning can just come in and explain to me what is his idea of a cyber diplomat, then I will be able to respond better perhaps. Can someone just tell me about...
Mr. Avinash, you want to unmute and ask that question?
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, many countries have appointed cyber ambassador in their external affairs administration. So I would like to ask you, how cyber diplomats is going to play important role in seeking...
Can you tell me from your readings, can you tell me what kind of a role has been envisaged for those cyber diplomats? Because I have not heard of the term cyber diplomat.
Like bilateral meetings have been taken place, sir, between US and China. And in...
Okay, I get it. Right. This comes from the fact that two nations, for example, bilateral, are fully aware of each other's cyber capabilities. Also aware that the cyber domain is a weapon system by itself and is capable of carrying out, paralyzing attacks on the systems of the other state. How, therefore, people with the understanding of cyber capability completely, as people can interact with each other to understand, coming to understandings, methodologies by which people, the systems do not, or the nation do not allow these things to go overboard. Diplomacy, as you're aware, diplomacy always involves restricting these actions of the other, coming to agreements, coming to acceptance of certain situations. For example, currently between India and China, what's happening in Ladakh? Everyone knows that certain areas have been vacated, but there are certain areas still under occupation. And we are standing still in the ideal way of explaining it is that we have been able to disengage, but we have not been able to de-escalate, right? Similarly, this is the kind of situation which comes in here. Two nations knowing fully well that they are capable of doing this. Russia, the Soviet Union, and the United States at the height of the Cold War knew always that they had enough systems pointing at each other for mutually assured destruction. But diplomacy, which kept on going on from time to time to be aware of each other's systems, etc., to prevent this from happening. I suppose cyber diplomats will be in the same genre with what I tried to explain to you about mutual assured destruction, because cyber to an extent can also go to the extent of a mutual assured destruction to a great extent, right? So I suppose cyber diplomacy will ultimately include the ambit of this, the aspect of preventing something going out of control. I hope I've answered your question. Yeah.
Can I just add one line to that?
Yeah.
Cyber diplomacy has got two aspects. It basically evolved from what Russians did in Estonia some time ago in 2007. One aspect is how to pressurize other countries through using cyber. That is one part of the cyber diplomacy. The other part of the cyber diplomacy is what you talked about, US, China talking and other countries talking, is to regulate how the cyber thing should be regulated, with regulatory provisions being discussed, etc. That is the other diplomacy that they talk about. So there are two aspects of this diplomacy. I think that is, added to what General Hasnain mentioned about. Bala, your question, can you come in and ask both three questions you have? All three you can ask one by one.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir. My question to both the General Hasnain and the chair is also, what are the intelligence challenges that we face in averting the information warfare related attacks, especially due to the proliferation of social networks where fake news and misinformation generally travels very fast?
Is that the only question?
No, you've got two more.
Okay.
The two more questions.
You want me to I'll answer this one first. Let me answer.
Yeah, okay, sir.
Sure, sir.
That's a very interesting question. There's no doubt about it. And since we face, I remember the first time when I came across the term fake news was in Singapore, and at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies. And when I entered there, they told me, General, we'd like to take you to a new department. So I said, what is that new department? They said, Department of Fake News. So what the hell? You mean you actually have a department which is teaching fake news, how to generate fake news? They said, no, it's all about countering fake news. So great. At least someone was learning about how to counter fake news. And countering fake news all comes from essentially research and good intelligence, right? Intelligence not from that typical military terminology, but information, processed information, which can be brought to bear to counter this kind of a thing. Now, it is of course, you have to create the systems. Let's say, for instance, the Information and Broadcasting Ministry in India has got an organization within it for fact checking, right? Fact checking is an aspect which has to relate to intelligence. Now, the moment, for example, something picked out of nowhere, a small incident which is happening somewhere in rural India is being generated or through fake news to create a communal cleavage in a certain part of India. This is a very typical situation which happens from time to time. Your intelligence is limited. You have no information on this at all. The IB, etc., agencies, etc., have no information on this at all. This is where the challenge comes in. You have to create the systems now with the, when I was talking about the Communication Strategy Board, this is one of the things that if you got this at the national level, you have to have state strategic communication boards at the state level and at the union territory level in sync with intelligence agencies simultaneously. And that is how you have to be able to get that information, extract that information, and neutralize through fact-finding, neutralize fake news at the earliest. We haven't even seen the beginning of the nuisance value of fake news, let me assure you. As you see greater internet penetration, as you see greater social media penetration, as you see greater smartphone penetration, this is something which is going to paralyze you in a huge way. And this is not going to be generated internally from India. I only gave you an example of India. This is going to be done from across the borders, across our very long borders. It's going to be done from China. It's going to be done from Tibet. It's going to be done from Pakistan in a huge way. They all understand where our weaknesses lie. So ramping up intelligence to deal with this particular issue, there is no shortcut to it. We just have to do it. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, the next one is also from you only. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. General, how do we shore our defenses against information warfare in times of peace? Like recently, China compared its rocket launch to India's COVID crisis.
That's an interesting one. That's an interesting one. You see, I mentioned the term strategic culture somewhere in the middle. This is something which has always worried me. This is something which I always speak about when I go into public, talking in public discourses here and there. If anything holds us back from preventing the penetration of Chinese propaganda, Chinese information warfare into our systems, into our public and things like that, is primarily the lack of strategic culture. If even your academic community in India does not have the means to be able to discern what is right and what is wrong when it comes to these kind of things, then you can understand this. And there's no shortcut to it. It is education, education, and education. It is a think tank culture. I mean, now 10 years or 8 years after I have retired, I'm now seeing cities such as Chennai having such wonderful think tanks. Calcutta, one or two of them. Mumbai, Delhi has got a lot of them. We need the American culture of think tanks, proliferating everywhere. More think tanks than the number of cafes and coffee houses. And these are the places where knowledge beyond the norm. Academic knowledge is all there as part of researches in universities and things like that. But it is this kind of knowledge, the knowledge on security issues, the knowledge on international affairs, the knowledge on social issues, much more on social issues. This is what India's major danger is going to lie in the future. This is what has to be spoken, and this is what has to be researched, and this is what has to be conveyed to the public. Many more people should be talking about it. I don't find enough intellectuals in India attempting to even do an outreach to, let's say, the tier 2, tier 3 cities, the category A, B cities. I make it a point to go very often to cities such as Baroda, Varanasi, Lucknow. Wherever someone invites me for a thing, I've been going physically to speak to them on national security issues. Unfortunately, this culture has not steeped into India. And it's a problem. It's a problem. The Chinese realize it. They realize it fully, and they are taking advantage of it. Banning 59 apps at the first time and 150 apps at the second time, we may continue doing that. But this issue is going to keep proliferating. As long as information technology is there, we are going to be susceptible to this kind of thing.
I will give a pass to Mr. Arun Viswanathan's question on politicians, how they should keep the national interests in mind. I think that is not a question which we can probably deal with in this seminar, in this webinar. On the MES Cyber Diplomacy Division, I think I have already answered it. It is not that suppose something goes wrong between India and China, they are going to start negotiating. No, the cyber diplomats don't do that. Cyber diplomacy deals with a different domain than this. That is done bilaterally, and that is by the respective territorial divisions which do it. And Commodore Vasan, sir, can you ask your question, please, on importance given by Pakistan way back in 1959 and beyond? Can you ask that question?
Thank you, General. Basically, in the initial stages of your presentation, you did highlight the fact that Pakistan is way ahead because they started way back in 1959, which means it's now a very refined organization. They have absorbed everything that's happening around them. They have modernized themselves. Unfortunately, we can't say the same thing about what's happened in India. We're really fallen behind. And you did, of course, say that in India, final part of your presentation, you did say that there are some efforts and some recommendations have been made. But what is your assessment of where do we stand in terms of having a cohesive organization that can meet the present-day challenges of information warfare?
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. A small correction, we misheard. It is actually way back in 1949 that the ISPR was set up. which is what surprised me when I got to know it the first time. I was really surprised how Pakistan had the ability to think of raising an organization. Was it with the same purpose or not? I'm not certain. But the ISPR really came into its being in the 80s. When, as I was explaining to you, the information warfare was utilized in the Afghan campaign against the Soviets at that particular time, and in particular to keep the jihadi cadres together. You know, spinning out this entire thing of Islam in danger, spinning out the entire aspects of information on the aspect of combination of elements of Islam, the caliphate, and things like that. All that helped the ISPR tremendously, and everything that they played out in Afghanistan, they used it similarly they tweaked it and they used it similarly in Jammu and Kashmir, and to great effect. It hit us. It hit us very badly. I can assure you, in all my multiple tenures in Jammu and Kashmir, in each time, I was always under pressure, thinking that why aren't we being able to respond to this? Now, there are 2-3 things in this, which you have to understand. I'm talking about the military first. I'm not talking about the larger national level. Let me talk about the military first. We have tended to treat most CICT campaigns also in terms of conventional warfare. You know, it took us many years to come out with a doctrine on CICT. I think it's 2004 that we came out with the first doctrine on CICT operations, right? Otherwise, we have been tending to treat this whole thing as a weapon on weapon, man on man, weapon on weapon, while not understanding that that CICT operations is the classic form of maneuver warfare. The problem in India is that the Indian armed forces and Indian army has been particularly that people think maneuver warfare is applicable to the armored corps and mechanized infantry, not realizing that maneuver warfare is a doctrine for the entire armed forces. Right? It's a question of how to put yourself at a position of advantage and seeking the different ways of doing it. Information warfare is one of those methodologies which can put you at great advantage if you have an information advantage, or if you can establish an information advantage over your adversary. We have never looked at it from that angle. We have gone into these situations without ever studying anything about the earlier campaigns, about what I famously normally call the cultural terrain of an area. We are very good at studying the physical terrain, but the cultural terrain we just don't know how to understand. Sensitivities of the people, the ideological aspects, the history of the region, the tribal aspects and things like that. Some of it has been done in the Northeast very well. Jammu and Kashmir, we have just not done it, not sufficiently. Patriots, if you remember General Patriots, famously in 2010, in Afghanistan, when he drafted the Coin Doctrine, actually brought in information as a very important subset of this the entire doctrine of fighting CICT. So these are the things that we have to go into, and this is the reason why we've been so backward in it. Now, who is to drive the national information effort? You see, the INB ministry is very well geared up. It's got all the means available to it, as I was explaining to you in my presentation, but it has got no idea of security. If you have to use information as a security system for security, and you're being targeted by information in terms of security, then there has to be a national body which should be capable of understanding it, comprehending it, creating the counters for it. Can the INB ministry do it? Does it have any security orientation to do it? You can't blame them for it. This is the reason why I suggested this body. That this is the body, a national communication strategy board or authority or something like that, which will be, outside the government, taken a lot of people on deputation, etc., have long tenures with them, have a security orientation to it. And it's a necessary thing, because you can't separate information in terms of civilian information and military information, because today's world information has become securitized for everyone. This is the reason for it. And we have to overcome these mindsets. The COVID crisis has given us a tremendous opportunity to understand this. with kind of information coming from China, etc. The last 2-3 years after Doklam has given us a tremendous opportunity to understand this. Who better than General Narasimhan to explain this to all of us? I think with this experience behind us, we should start making an appreciable difference in our approach to information warfare. Thank you.
There's a question regarding coordination and cooperation in information warfare between China and Pakistan. Is it there? I think that is Colonel Hariharan's question. If you could answer that, sir.
Okay, right. To the best of my knowledge, I mean, I don't have official information.
Sir, before that, Commodore Vasan, sir, can we extend this by about 5 or 7 minutes so that we can
sir,
take on those
please go ahead.
questions? Thank you, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I have no official knowledge to confirm that there is actually coordination going on between our two adversaries on this front. But obviously, when you are when you are targeting a country which is your common adversary, like India is being targeted, you would obviously share your wealth, the wealth of your experience and knowledge and your capabilities, etc. Right? And this can be done most ideally in the information world. The Chinese do tremendous, of course, General Narasimhan will confirm that they do a tremendous amount of research. Anywhere in the world I've always found a Chinese scholar there. Right? Any international courses you go, you always find a good Chinese there, always, and they're capable, they're very capable people. But at the end of the day, their understanding of national culture can never be the same as Pakistan. The Pakistanis, after all, part of India, got away from here only. Ethnically, they are essentially Indian, South Asian. So they understand the culture. Understanding culture is half the issue here. And I'm sure there are enough Chinese embedded in different organizations with the ISPR in Islamabad, Lahore, and all along the border and places like that, who are there learning from the Chinese, right? Learning from the Pakistanis. I'm not sure if that many Pakistanis are going there to learn things from them, but definitely the Chinese would definitely want to learn much more about Indian characteristics and culture and response systems and things like that, the social world. Because more and more you realize this, information warfare, to exploit information warfare, it's not a question of just weapon systems or command and control systems and things like that. Today you are going into essentially the aspects of invisible warfare, the aspects of gray zone warfare, where you require to know the social aspects extremely well. And you can go completely wrong in this. If you don't do it professionally, you can reveal your hand within the first day itself, and your entire campaign can get neutralized and negated by your adversary. Right? So I am quite sure. In fact, I can be say with utter assurance completely that a tremendous amount of coordination is probably going on. Under the garb of, there are enough Chinese in Pakistan. There are enough engineers there constructing the China-Pakistan economic corridor or the different projects involved with it. There are 11,000 people, some soldiers supposed to be guarding the entire infrastructure. So under the garb of all that, I'm sure there will be many people planted there who are carrying out this particular activity.
I'll just give one line answer to this, sir. You during this Ladakh issue, you saw a Twitter tweet coming up on Y-20 aircraft of Chinese landing in Skardu. I'm sure you would have noticed that.
I remember that.
So that was precisely an IW operation. Because there was no, at that time, it didn't land. It landed later, that's a different issue. But then, if you look at that photograph, the airport was not shown. The aircraft was marked in blue and white. No military aircraft is marked in blue and white. I am sure Colonel Hariharan knows this far better than anybody else. So these cooperation and coordination may be there, but I would little differ with General Hasnain in the sense that they are already embedded in ISPR. No, they are not. They do this cooperation, but there's a Pakistani officer posted in the theater commands of China. So there will be some coordination which is on. We're not knowing the extent of the extent of that particular kind of a cooperation is what I wanted to convey. For the
I
next
may just
question,
I may just add that also the same example of Skardu, there was also at that time a particular aspect of the movement of Pakistani reserves into Gilgit-Baltistan, which never got confirmed ever.
Yeah.
A full division worth was supposed to have moved into Gilgit-Baltistan, which I kept trying to trace, to never do. So that was also another classic case of trying to divert attention, Indian army attention towards Kargil and towards Gilgit-Baltistan and things like that.
so the next question, I think I'll answer it, because the
Yeah.
Prime Minister's statement of last year, post Galwan, was with reference to a particular incident that happened on that day and on that place. So this actually, we went for about a week, we had to go out and explain as to what he meant by this. We will leave it at that. I don't think it was part of an information or a psychological warfare. It was part of a communication that he was trying to give it to our public. The next question from...
Nara, can I just very briefly, without going into detail, just comment on this? You see, this I think we continue to more or less maintain that the Prime Minister was always referring to the Galwan part of it, and not to the issues which were happening at the Pangong Tso at that particular time.
Correct.
Yeah, I think we have put this out many times. I have spoken on this quite openly at many times, that on that particular day, 2 days after the 16th of June, that's I think on the 18th of June when the Prime Minister spoke, it was with reference to context. Many times political leaders will speak with reference to context. He was asked, he spoke about Galwan having been vacated. Now everyone started construing that, having said that it's been vacated, yahan koi aaya nahi tha, koi aaya chala gaya, things like that, he was also referring to Pangong Tso. That was not actually true.
Yeah, Mr. Arun Viswanathan, your question on you maintain data security. Where does the alleged Russian interference in US elections figure? That is the question, sir.
Yes, I agree. I mean, no one has answers to what exactly, how much and what extent it really happened. Maybe you may know it, Nara, I'm not sure of it myself. But if you relate this issue to the future in India, greater network centricity, our systems will have to be managed to a great extent. So far, our adversaries are not into the mode of trying to influence the political environment of India to that extent, right? It will be very, I mean, it will be very awkward if the Pakistanis start attempting to do something like this. They have never attempted to do it. The Chinese could in the future possibly look at it. So we have to secure ourselves against that kind of a thing. But I don't think in the near future, we are anywhere in this, under this kind of a threat. Although it builds up in the future, no one can say. Yeah.
There is only one point. There was some evidence which was presented by the CIA on this, saying that there was Russian interference, but then that was suppressed because of the political reasons within USA. So we will not go into those details because that is part of information warfare which Russian could have done it. We don't have specific information on that. Nomita, can you ask your question, please? Are you here?
I can see the question here. Very nice.
Yeah. You can answer that, sir.
Okay. The question is, how can India maneuver information while selecting and identifying a target audience where there isn't a free flow of information in a country such as China, where information is often censored or entirely blocked? How do countries counter these impediments while seeking to manage the perception of the enemy's public? This is an interesting, very interesting question. If you remember in my presentation, I mentioned about democracy, the Indian democracy actually providing vulnerability. Democratic systems and democratic nations will always be that much more vulnerable because they don't have a system of checks and balances. You see our evening news, almost 90% of it, nothing is controlled virtually. Some portion of it may be advisories here and there, which are given. But the Chinese system is completely different. The Russian system is completely different. At the height of the Cold War, the Soviet system was completely different. And they safeguarded their people from any form of American propaganda to a great extent. Classic example, I think, is the ban on the 4G in Kashmir. Ban on 4G was primarily so that the the Pakistani propaganda on social media cannot easily reach its targets inside the Kashmir Valley, and that terrorists who utilize the 4G systems, smartphones, etc., for conveyance of messages, etc., and for training purposes, for financial things, transactions, etc., they could not utilize it. Right. At the end of the day, when I went back 3 months ago, when I went and spoke to a lot of people in Kashmir, I was told that yes, it did create a lot of discomfort for education system, like people who want, you couldn't really access your search handles and things like that. But when it came to anything else, the dark net was there and it provided things. So anywhere in the world, the dark net, I'm not sure how the technologies of the dark net exactly work, but the VPN systems and things like that all provide some form of access. It's not enough, not sufficient. I would not say that it's the same quantum of information that the normal internet penetration can provide, but to certain target audiences, etc., it is always possible. It's always possible at a particular risk, right? That is how it is happening at the moment. How the internet technology changes in the future is something that we are not sure of today. What will 5G bring with it? How much of control can you establish over 5G and things like that? This is something which only the future can tell us. Yeah.
Dr. Shivapada Rath, are you here?
Sir, good evening, sir. I just wanted to know what should India do to minimize vulnerable entry points in the cyberspace? That is my first question, sir.
And there's a question also, what is the way ahead for India to strengthen its existing information security and cryptographic technologies? Should India develop a firewall like the Chinese Great Firewall to check the onslaught of disinformation camp? Obviously, India is attempting to do all this, and we are a powerhouse as far as information technology is concerned, research works are concerned. We have not, unfortunately, we did not do enough on the cyber domain. We didn't enter into it in early enough to be able to do our research work on it. There's no doubt that what can happen in the future, some of the things which is being spoken about, for example, today, is that one of the geopolitical, geostrategic effects of the COVID reset, the reset which is taking place internationally, strategic reset which is taking place, may lead to greater ownership of internet systems. You know, nations clamming up, closing down, having their own servers, large servers, all being placed inside their nations, etc. These are probably some things which will work in favor of cybersecurity, but I'm sure these will last a few years, and there will be enough research work to go around this. So it's not something that I'm not a technical man to be able to explain to you in great detail, but yes, firewalls, etc. This will be a constant cat and mouse game which will carry on between people who are attempting to penetrate the systems and people who are creating the firewalls to prevent the penetration of these systems. So it's not something which I can explain to you technically, but progress in this obviously is going to continue taking place at a very fast pace. Yeah.
The next question I think is on how can information warfare help in overcoming the historical cleavages in South Asia towards a more economically integrated and militarily peaceful South Asian region?
Oh, sorry.
Pratik
Whose question is
Yadav.
this?
Pratik Yadav.
Pratik Yadav. I've got this here. Is India's no first use nuclear policy? This is the question. This is the question, isn't it?
No, sir. Before that. There's one more before that.
Yeah. How can information warfare help in overcoming the historical cleavages in South Asia towards a more economically integrated and militarily peaceful South Asia? This is a very interesting question. This is a positive question. That is the positive use of information systems on bringing about integration rather than cleavage, rather than disintegration, bringing in integration. I suppose creating this kind of integrated systems for better cooperation, particularly in the economic field, the social field, presupposes a better politico-diplomatic environment between two nations. But not necessarily that you have to have a perfect system, a perfect understanding before being able to attempt to do something. I'm sure the United States and China, although future adversaries, today have enough systems of cooperation between them which are going on. You can see the manner and the number of students from China who are studying in the United States. You're seeing the Chinese scholars also carrying out research in the United States and things like that. But in India, I think that the level which has happened in South Asia, particularly with Pakistan, the level of misunderstanding or whatever you may want to call it, the situation which has created such animosity that forget this kind of a cooperation, economic or social cooperation. You can't even get the two countries to play games with each other, right? So I go back to my old saying that until you get a certain level of understanding in the political-diplomatic environment, lessening of suspicion, etc., that will probably help in starting the process. And once the process is started, that process itself can help tremendously in integration and bringing together people, etc. But till that time, the decision is taken. Now, you are seeing what is happening in Kashmir at the moment. You're seeing what's happening on the line of control. Things are reasonably silent. There's a ceasefire on. How long will this last? You've seen the attitude from the Pakistani leadership. It goes up to a certain level and comes back to the same stage. The whole issue of trade, the whole issue of cotton. If you remember, it happened just 2 months ago. Almost a decision almost taken and then withdrawn at the last minute. And then coming out with awkward, statements on things on Article 370 and things like that. These things will continue. These are issues which I don't expect to be overcome in a hurry, right? And therefore, to get the trigger to do this, I suppose the trigger will ultimately come in some form, something like the manner in which Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee's Lahore Yatra started. And you know what a sorry state it came to within a few months. But that's the kind of trigger which will have to be given to it. Some kind of out of the box kind of a thing which will happen. And then once this catches on a little bit, social media is going to play a great role. We haven't seen India, Pakistan in that situation of a social media revolution in a state of good relations at all. If that slight improvement in the environment takes place, maybe social media can help tremendously in the integration of the region, particularly in the field of education. And SAARC, to that extent, can play a major role in that. Yeah.
Sir, I think we have run out of time. We have already taken another 15 minutes than what was scheduled. So let me wind up here. I'll just want to make a couple of points before I wind up. Even I can answer this. One or two questions are there in the chat box on the Internet Governance Forum, etc. It is not only MEA. Cyber Division will come into play of the MEA, but there are others like National Cyber Security Coordinator and the MeitY, etc. They are also involved in these kind of issues, and I think it's a combined effort that goes on to deal with all these things. As far as no first use of nuclear policy is concerned, I don't think that is very relevant to information warfare as such. So I think most of the questions have been answered. Let me just say two things to you. One is two or three things. One is, please understand, information warfare works on lack of attributability when it is required. When it is required, it is also attributable. Why I say this is, you have black, white, and gray zones of information warfare. When you say black, your identity is hidden. When you say white, your identity is revealed. When you're a gray, actually you don't know who it is doing. It may be in the form of somebody else doing this. Okay, so basically attributability is a major factor that we need to keep in mind. The second thing is it works during peace as well as in war. We should not think only peace or information warfare is only for warfare. It also works in peace. So you need to build up this constituency during peace, which can be utilized in war subsequently. And I think I'll leave the rest of the things. I think Hong Kong is one of the issues that you can look at when the way things were organized in Hong Kong. That is typically an information warfare kind of a thing. On the questions of how can we fight information warfare, you have to be extremely nimble-footed to identify the threat and neutralize it or counter it, whichever way you want it. And so your monitoring systems and then the fact check, which General Hasnain talked about, is extremely important, and then a resource is required basically to do this. And lastly, in the lighter vein, between me and General Hasnain, we beat ISPR in establishing, in entering Twitter and Facebook by the Indian Army in 2013. In fact, ISPR followed 1 year later. So that is in the lighter way. I'll close the session here and hand it over back to the organizers. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for patiently taking all our questions. And thank you for the opportunity given me for present this vote of thanks. We sincerely thank Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain, sir, for his valuable time. Thank you, sir, for sharing all your insightful inputs. A sincere thanks also goes up to the chair and moderator for today's session, Lieutenant General S.L. Narasimhan, sir, for steering the discussion and giving your recommendations duly. Thank you very much, sir, for taking your invaluable time for being with us today. We also express our gratitude to Director C3S Commodore R.S. Vasan and all the distinguished members of C3S, veterans, and participants for their active participation. On this note, we also look forward to seeing you all on Monday, 14th June at our C3S Institutional Dialogue on the topic China and the Pharmaceutical Industry by Professor Institute of Science. Thank you once again, and Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you
sir.
very much
Thank
for
you.
this honor. Pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Hasnain. Bye. Catch up
Thank you
with
very much. All the best. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.